healthcare is going to change, how people work is going to change, transportation is going to change. There's going to be a whole lot of events that just don't go back to the way it was, and some for the better. Hopefully our climate cleans up a little bit because we don't have as many cars on the road. So I think there's going to be a lot of benefits, but it's going to be uncomfortable.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi, and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. Do I have somebody special on the line for you before I tell you who he is? All I can say right now, he's in the top 10 global thought leader list. He's a best-selling author. He's a works futurist. He's a TEDx speaker, and he's also a podcast host. And with that, I'd like to introduce IRA WOLFE to the show. How are you, IRA?
I am doing great, Rick. I appreciate the opportunity from the other side of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's my pleasure to have you here. Now, Ira and I were just talking briefly about some olden day movies and how it's relevant to our topic today. But the opening line that I saw on the form here is, "Remember Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz." Now, I wonder if you can elaborate for us, Ira, how this is relevant to today's conversation.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Rick. We're obviously in very challenging times. There's so many different ways we can phrase it. With the COVID-19, the global pandemic, it's affected every one of our lives. And the tagline from one of my books was, "When the shift hits your plan." Got to be careful when we say that. When the shift hits your plan. And yesterday I was talking with my co-host for my podcast. And he said, we should probably call it "When the shift breaks your plan." And that's pretty much there. But going back to your question about Dorothy, in The Wizard of Oz, to get home, to go back to normal, to go back home, all Dorothy had to do was click her heels.
Yep.
And she went back to Kansas. There's a lot of conversation, at least in the States, in the U.S. There's a few states that are now reopening for business. And there's a sense, and it's a problem. There's a sense that we're just going to be able to click our heels and go back to the way it was. And there is no going back to the way it was. There is no Dorothy. There are no magic heels, magic shoes. We're gonna be on a journey that's unprecedented, uncertain. We don't know really where it's headed. Every day is sort of a new event, and it's going to make a lot of people super uncomfortable.
Well, it's a compounding effect through the annals of time. We all combine our collective experiences in life, but it's whether or not, I think, Ira, if we learn something from it. I wonder if you can share your point of view about, learning from it and where we might be tracking in the future as a result post COVID-19.
Well, I guess the one uncertainty that we're going to have, it's going to be uncertain. It's going to be different.
Yeah.
I mean, the world's going to be different. I mean, I try to come up with metaphors and analogies that speak to that. Mm-hmm. And, if you imagine that you were writing your life's book and you were on chapter 4, whatever, or 5 or 6 or 9, whatever that might be, and all of a sudden you were interrupted and you're not going to be able to go back and continue writing it. I mean, we're literally going to go from chapter 4 to chapter 8, after this. And there's going to be a lot of blank pages in there. This is I hate the term. If anybody has a better term out there, please introduce me to it. But new normal. But there's going to be a new normal. And, as in the past, and you kind of gave reference to this, in the past, we've been through pandemics, we've been through world wars, we've been through catastrophes, and everybody comes out and a new normal evolves, and that's what's going to happen this time. It's never happened so quickly. I mean, even going back 100 years to the Spanish flu, especially in the U.S., but globally, there was quite a few deaths, millions of deaths. We didn't have the technology, we didn't have the medicine. Mm-hmm. We weren't as mobile then, so there were some, there were some limitations to it, although there was a lot of immigration and movement that way. But there was a lot of, sickness and a lot of death, way back when. But we didn't have technology. I mean, they couldn't diagnose us, they couldn't treat it. I think we're going to come out on the other side of this very interesting enough. I think technology is going to help solve the problem, uh, and it's going to accelerate the change. And, for as many people that think we're going to go back to the way it was, that technology curve, that disruptive curve, the
Hmm.
digital transformation that we've had, and that's what I've been speaking and writing a lot about, that didn't stop. I mean, we're able to flatten through physical and social distancing and modern healthcare. We were able to flatten that curve and not have millions of people dying from it. The problem is the technology curve continued, and it probably accelerated. And I think that's what people don't understand. We're doing a Zoom call. We're halfway across the world. That would have been impossible, 100 years
Yeah,
ago, or
absolutely.
even 20 years ago. I mean,
Hmm.
even in 2001, we had, after 9/11, there were disruptions, and we didn't have the technology to do that. Even after the Great Recession, we didn't have the technology to be able to kind of do this. I don't think we're going back to, I don't think, the consensus is, and most of the experts agree. I mean, we're not going back to the way it was. I mean, there are people that said, um, I don't mind working from home. I don't have an hour or 2 hours commute every day. I can get my life
Absolutely.
back.
Yeah.
Last week, I did I did a call. It was just a routine check with a rheumatologist. I basically visit her every 8 months, and she says, "Yeah, continue. You're doing good." Well, normally I get up in the morning. I try to get an early morning appointment. It takes me 45 minutes, a half hour to 45 minutes in traffic to get there. It
Yep.
takes me another half hour to get home. I sit in the reception room for 15, 20 minutes if I'm lucky. And then I have my appointment. So it's sort of 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours out of my life. I did the call last week in 10 minutes.
And you were done and
We got
dusted.
on the, yeah, we got, and so it's like, why would I want to go back and do that? I mean, I have great physicians. I love my physicians. I've shared this with other people. Um, but I got to tell you, if I've got to if I've got to turn a 10-minute phone call or a conversation into a 30-minute or a 3 hour, commute back and wait, I might look for other people that I can do with telehealth. So I think I think medicine's going to change
Hmm.
how we deliver that finally. I mean, it was a slow uptick. I came from healthcare, so I understand how slow it can be. But I think healthcare is going to change. How people work is going to change. Transportation is going to change. There's going to be a whole lot of events that just don't go back to the way it was, and some for the better. Hopefully, our climate cleans up a little bit because we don't have as many cars on the road.
Yes.
So I think there's going to be a lot of benefits, but it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's a wonderful insight that you're sharing with us. Thank you so much, Ira. Now, a couple of things I've taken out of there is I guess the modality of learning. For example, for children, as a parent myself, I know that my children are both home. They're going to be doing some home study for at least one term, and I think there's, like you said, this need to travel. If that changes, I wonder how good that is going to be for the globe. Now, I'm not sure if you've seen it yourself, Ira, but the images above China
Mhm.
since the pandemic began was to do with a pollution reference and how the skies had cleared up because they had literally stopped all the traffic, burning fossil fuels and getting around their merry ways. You know, it looked like the world was taking a bit of a deep breath for once.
It was, and it goes beyond that. I mean, even around, we're about 70 to 80 miles west of New York City.
Hmm.
I haven't been to the city. It was, we were
Not at the
supposed to be there a
moment.
couple of weeks ago, but we didn't. Yeah, not the safest place to go. So we're being safe.
Yep.
But the pictures around there, I mean, they're saying they're remarkably clear. I saw a story the other day on the canals of Venice in Italy.
Oh yes.
Just 2 months ago, they were talking about how bad it was, and the wildlife couldn't even, was either dying in there or it wouldn't venture into those
Yep.
canals.
Yep.
And now they're saying it's crystal clear.
Hmm.
It's crystal clear, and that was only after a few weeks of clearing that up. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think the environment's going to change. Transportation, healthcare, education. You brought up distance learning. Again, education was very hesitant on doing that, and now I think there's a lot of people that are going to continue to do it. And look at all the universities that were kind of touching on that, but they still valued the classroom experience. And there's still there's still values. There's still a tremendous value to having people in the same room. There's
Contact.
no
Yeah.
that's yeah. We're not going 100% virtual. That's just not going to happen. But you're using a common sense, a practical approach to, hey, if we can do it as well virtually, then we're going to do it, and it's going to save a lot of money. So I think real estate's going to change. It's not going to go back to the way it was. I think there's going to be a lot of businesses that are shuttered, unfortunately. But a lot of shopping centers were, at least in the U.S., we're on the verge of collapse anyway.
Yeah.
A lot of empty space. I think there's a lot of corporate buildings that people are going to realize we don't need all this space. People can work effectively at least a few days a week at home.
Yeah.
Hopefully the roadways get better. Who knows what's going to happen with movie theaters? Netflix, I just read, it was just minutes ago, Netflix added twice as many subscribers as they expected, and they already expected an increase. They had 15 million new subscribers last month.
It's incredible, isn't it?
15 million. Yeah, so they already anticipated. I can't remember if it was double or triple what they normally get, and it doubled what their expectations were. So
it's interesting because I've had this discussion with so many people, just to hark back to our conversation about traveling to work. The amount of people that have been asked to work from home, that were in organisations that were teetering on that edge between, oh, can I trust you to work at home, to now you have been forced to jump off this cliff, you're working from home. The amount of people that have said to me, this is fantastic and it's so wonderful that this has happened. And I'm thinking, hang on, we're in the middle of a pandemic and you're saying this is wonderful that this has happened. Are you hearing some positive stories?
I am, and I'm a little bit, I guess, biased on this. I've been working from home. I had for almost 14 years, 15 years. And prior to that, I actually had an interim role. I was a VP of a hospital, and we moved our office, and I had a new office there, and we had a boardroom, and that was like in 2004. And I actually never moved into it because my staff did so well, my employees did so well without me there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to change that, and I actually moved to another state. I moved, we moved down to Maryland, down near the beach. And I literally was 4 hours from my office. So I stopped in about once a month. But I've been working virtually since 2007. So somewhat, kind of facetiously or ironically, maybe is the better word, the world adapted to my style. And there were a lot of people that were virtual before. And so I made no adaptation. I've been on Zoom. I've been, virtual. I've had a voiceover. My one employee who's been with me for almost 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
she lives, in the Midwest. I mean, she lives 1,000 miles away. I haven't seen her physically in about 10 years. So this was normal for me. Now, for a lot of people, it was pretty traumatic. I mean, and part of it was overnight, people left, and the only thing that they had was maybe a desktop, maybe a laptop at home that the whole family shared. When they were there, the kids shared the games, the spouse shared it, they got on it, they had a wireless that wasn't working, or it was the cheapest plan. I mean, so there was a lot, but now that we're in this, depending on where you live, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, people sort of got used to it. They elevated and became comfortable. And, I'm not sure everybody wants to be cooped up with 2 or 3 kids and, and a spouse, trying to crowd out the kitchen table as a work area. But I think people were going to figure out it wasn't as bad as it was. And, there's a lot of people that commuted an hour or an hour and a half each way.
Yep.
It's like, hey, we get that time back maybe 2 or 3 days a week, not every day, but 2 or 3 days a week. So I think there's going to be a transition. I think a lot of people that are going to be called back to work, if they're forced back to a 5-day week,
Yep.
commuting every day, they're just not going to do it.
There's just going to be a change, and we're talking about technology, and I guess a lot of the upsides to it. Now, on that, there are giants built from the base technology, and in your book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about this wonderful book and how this came about.
Sure. I've always been fascinated by change. My first, and this is just an example of that. My first career, I was actually a dentist.
Mm-hmm.
So I practiced for 15 years. I was with the public health service. I had a residency. I had 4 years of professional school, 4 years of college. So I had a lot of time into it. Um, I I loved everything about dentistry, but dentistry. I loved the change. I loved the innovation. I loved the technology. I loved working with people. I loved running the business. I loved, helping people, get more comfortable with something they feared. I mean, I loved all those aspects, but the idea of doing the same procedures over and over and over again just didn't excite me.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried. I mean, I ended up, I was computerized in 1987. We were using like intraoral cameras and digital X-rays like in the early 90s. So I was always on the front end of innovation and change and
Mm-hmm.
technology. But I just didn't like what I had to do at the end. Uh, and so part of it is in 2016, just a few years ago, I did a TED Talk. I had an opportunity to do a TED Talk, and the theme was make change work for you. And I spent a lot of time. We can talk about the experience in the TED Talk, but it was certainly a humbling experience. It's not for those who think, hey, you can go up in 10 and 15 minutes and talk on stage about something you love doing. I got to tell you, it's not. It's a very humbling experience to be able to do that. But I was very honored and grateful. But I spent so much time preparing for that, thinking through it, trying to digest my thoughts, my ideas into just a few minutes,
Mm-hmm.
that I had so much more to say than I could on the TED stage. So, coming out of that, it's like, I'm going to continue this and I'm going to put this into a book. I'm going to write a book. And the original part of the original theme for the book was when the shift hits your plan. So it was about change.
Yes.
And it was about an exponential change. And, I jokingly say this a month ago or 2 months ago, if you mention exponential change, and I did all the time, people looked at you and go, oh, yeah, I kind of get it. Yeah, things move slowly. And then they all of a sudden take an upward swing. And you talk
Mm-hmm.
about computers and technology, and people got it. But they didn't emotionally get it. It was an intellectual process. They go, yeah, I got it. I've lived through change before. If you asked a 3-year-old, I don't know how old your kids are, but if you asked a 3-year-old to explain exponential growth or the exponential curve, they probably can do it now. Everybody understands it because of COVID-19, what the
Mm-hmm.
curve looks like and how quickly things ramp up and the doubling, of whatever event it is. So I started to write when the shift hit your plan, and then realized that I was going to end up being, if I was going to speak or teach or educate about it, I was going to be a futurist. I was going to be a keynote speaker, and a strategist. And I love talking about it, but that's not what I enjoy doing. I mean, I really enjoy helping people, helping companies do a better job at recruitment and hiring. I like talking about change, but it had to be more in the context of my world. So we made it the subtitle, and we changed the book to Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. And what it was is the world's going to change,
Yep.
which is the first, by the way, for anybody out there who says, I'm not a recruiter, I'm not in HR, I don't even own a business. Why would I read this book? I will tell you, and I heard this today by a consultant. He called me and says, I was completely shocked by your book, and I didn't know what he was going to tell me. He says, I absolutely love it. I've read the first part twice. The first 130 pages has nothing to do with recruitment. It has to do with the world we live in now. It's the speed of change. It's the acceleration of change. I fully wrote in the book. In fact, I just delivered a keynote this morning for a conference, virtual, of
Mm-hmm.
course. And I started out by reading. I said, I've got a great book, one of my favorites. And it starts out by saying, the future simply arrived too fast for us. The scale and speed of change are unprecedented, exhilarating, and terrifying. Those were words I wrote 4 years ago. That's in the book. That's what the book's about. It's about what we've experienced in the last 8 weeks for the speed, the acceleration of change. Now, I anticipated it was going to be from technology,
Mm-hmm.
not a pandemic. But as we come out of this, and we said this earlier, as the pandemic flattens, the technology is continuing, and it's going to accelerate because I truly believe that the technology, not only are all the other events going on, but the technology that technology is going to help solve this. Biotechnology, vaccines. That vaccine that everybody wants is going to come out of technology. So technology is going to help us make ourselves a better life, and it's also simultaneously going to disrupt our lives. And so that's a little bit of the background on the book. But this is for anybody who wants to read it. The first half of the book has zero to do with recruitment. If you're in recruiting and hiring and business, then you'll enjoy the last half of the book too. But there's a lot of content up front about that. And so my TED Talk turned into a book and turned into a second edition of the book, which just came out in February. So it's brand new. So I've updated a bit, and I probably could update it again after the last couple of weeks.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now, I wonder, has this book resulted in, I guess, a difference in how people who are in HR actually manage recruiting processes? Because I know that you have an organization yourself, which is called Success Performance Solutions. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So, it's interesting because my business, the Success Performance Solutions, which I started 25 years ago, primarily we work with companies helping them hire people. We do a little career development for individuals if they want it, but we provide assessments. So when a company says, is there a way to test somebody if they have typing skills or they can use Word, we can do that. If they say, we're looking for a new CEO, but we want to make sure they're a good culture fit and they will fit in and they could be a good leader, we can test for that and everything in between. So I've got clients from warehouses to call centers, healthcare, distribution, manufacturing, you name it. We have clients in there, and we test people from the front line to the front desk to the C-suite. That's the core part of our business. What evolved over the last few years, when my first book was called The Perfect Labor Storm, and it was about basically the shortages we were going to have now, that eventually we're going to have people that needed more complex, different skill sets, and that we're going to have a labor shortage. So I've been writing and talking about this, helping clients prepare that the world that we live in today was not going to be the world that we lived in tomorrow, and some of those changes were going to happen pretty quickly. So part of that became a few years ago, people would call me up and say, we'd love to be able to test more people. However, we can't find them. Do you have any suggestions? So I started to help people. We added a new service. And again, it was my love. My marketing is really content creation and marketing. So I've been a digital marketer for years. I've always wrote newsletters and articles. So it was an easy transition to help companies say, you need to create a better brand. You need to create a better image. Stop copying, pasting your job descriptions and expect people to apply. You have to respond better if somebody applies for a job. You can't respond to them 6 weeks later and say, hey, thanks for the application. There had been, one of my topics is keeping the H in HR. And one of the challenges is people say, oh, technology ruined our life. It took the human out of HR. No, it didn't. Basically, technology should allow you to automate what could be automated and then free up your time so you can spend more time communicating with human beings. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations worldwide fell victim. They use the technology as the solution rather than as a tool. So that became my message. And that's really what the back half of Recruiting in the Age of Googlization is about. So Success Performance Solutions, we still provide a lot of testing. And believe it or not, companies are still hiring even during this. There's businesses that are growing and thriving, and there's others that are certainly struggling. But they still need to recruit people. They need to treat people better. They need to treat candidates better. Nobody wants to work for a company that's not going to treat them well. And the recruitment process, the hiring process, is really a reflection of your company. So for the last 4 years, I've been doing a lot of speaking, a lot of writing, met with lots of people. And as I said, just today, I spoke at a national conference we were supposed to be in Disney World, by the way. So I would be doing this from Orlando, but instead of doing it from northeastern Pennsylvania. But one of the things that I spoke about was, how do you Google proof your recruitment marketing? And it's interesting because most of the people on the call, even in 2020, didn't relate what Google has to do with recruitment. And frankly, if you pick up a smartphone, I don't know what the statistics are worldwide. They're probably even higher. But in the U.S., 96% of everybody under 30 years old owns a smartphone. And when they're looking for a job, they pick up their phone, their iPhone, their Samsung, their Galaxy, whatever it is, and they do a search for a job. And where do you go? Google. Most people go to Google. Or they go to a search engine. And if you don't understand how search engines work, you can't get people to find that you have a good opening or learn about your company. So, the message, it was pretty slow for the last couple of years. I mean, I've been incredibly busy, but getting HR to move was certainly hard work. It was tedious, uh, but little by little they did. The last 8 weeks has really exploded this. I mean, people realized how archaic some of their processes were, and now what it's like to work remotely, what it's like to apply not from a corporate office, but to a corporate office. Again, there's a lot of changes, so I think this is going to accelerate that shift. But I appreciate the question. There is one thing I wanted to say, and I don't want to forget this when we were talking before. It is going back to that normal, and this is part of that shift. There were a lot of people that were hesitant on a lot of companies that were hesitant on working from home, and now they realized it's not so bad and it's effective. And I don't have the answer to this, so this is just my gut saying this. My suspicion is when people go back to work, and because there's going to have to be physical and social distancing, that the productivity at work is going to be worse than the productivity working from home. Because that meeting of having 8 or 10 people cram into the lunchroom or into a boardroom, and now there's going to have to be that distancing. Even going to lunch, it was everybody piled out. You worked together. You stood in lines at a Starbucks or at a local restaurant, and now you're going to have that social distancing. So all of a sudden, an hour lunch takes 2 hours, or that meeting, because everybody's washing their hands and doing the distance and speaking through a mask. It's like, I can sit at my desk and I don't need my mask on. I can eat. And everybody says you can't eat at your desk. Now everybody will be eating at their desk. I'm just wondering how much productivity is going to fall. And I don't think we're ever going back to the way it was. So it'll never really be as productive going to work as it is now working from home. There's still going to be some functions that will have to do face to face. But I think that's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of people that go, hey, we're going to open our doors at 7 o'clock next Monday. We expect everybody to be back here. I think it's going to be a shock in many ways. So
it'd be a real shame, wouldn't it, Ira, if we didn't learn from this and adapt right now?
Oh, I hope we learn. I think it's the same old story. I think there's people that are going to try to squeeze, to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. To go back, our business can't do it that way. We need to be here. I think many people are going to learn. I think there's going to be, it's going to be that bell-shaped curve. I think 20% are going to adopt easily, and 60% in the middle, and the other 20% are probably going to fail. I mean, I don't know how some of these businesses can possibly survive without improving the way they do things, automating some functions, hiring better people, using technology. I just don't see how it's going to happen. It's pretty remarkable because, we still had currency. And I know the other day I had a choice of paying by cash or by, paying by credit card or just using my phone, Apple Pay.
Yeah.
And, never before it's like, oh, I'll just pay for that. It's only $8. Now I'm thinking, okay, how many people touched that pad? And even if I put my card in, I got to extract it. So I'm just going to use my phone and get it near and get paid. So, the whole process of currency. I still like to touch cash. I don't trust direct deposit. Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's going to explode. And it may not be Bitcoin itself, but I think cryptocurrency. The fact, I think that's going to take off. So. Again, a lot of these things that people were hesitant on, I think, are just going to accelerate.
What do you think about security in terms of, we've adopted the technology and we've embraced it? How do you think security is going to change in terms of using technology more?
What my guess is that the toothpaste is out of the tube on this, where people were reluctant, and there's two sides to this, just from a personal standpoint, where people were reluctant to do some of these things because of security. I know people that who only had flip phones. They didn't have smartphones because of the GPS and you can be tracked. I think that's going by the wayside because I think there's a lot of functions that people won't be able to do with that. So just like my mother, who is now 96 years old, says, I don't want my bank accounts online. Well, they are online, whether she wants them or not, they're online. But she said, oh, I need to get a check. And then all of a sudden the Social Security said, we're not sending you checks anymore. We're direct depositing them. So she relented to that. Now she gets a direct deposit. So I think this is just going to accelerate a lot of that change. I think it's like the Zoom, problem two weeks ago. Everything runs together. Somebody calls it Blur's Day. No, I don't know what day it is. One of my friends calls it Blur's Day. One of the challenge with that is all of a sudden nobody's going to be allowed to use Zoom. And then Zoom says, oh, we fixed the hole in the security, but there was no other good way to do that or a reliable way to do it. Zoom happened to have the best technology. So is Zoom going to be the only technology in the future? No, there's going to be other companies that benefit from it, because I think a lot of companies and a lot of people were hesitant on doing that. But when everybody comes back, because companies had to be relaxed and say, you can't work from home because you don't have a VPN, or the VPNs were slow, or the technology didn't work. I think that's out. It's like, okay, now just get me better technology.
They just seem to be like Band-Aid solutions to try and avoid the change, aren't they?
Yeah, and for, in 8 weeks, people have become a remarkable way. I mean, people learned how to adapt, and they learned how to figure it out, and companies learned how to figure it out. So I think technology is going to boom. It's going to accelerate. Hopefully, I don't think that means that we just throw our guard down and go, screw it. We're not going to have, hey, that's just going to be the way it is. I think we're going to find solutions for privacy and security. Most of the mistakes that are done aren't because of the technology. A lot of it's just, people have the same password for everything. They don't necessarily take care of, to protect their personal information, as well as they should. So I think everybody's going to have to up their game, but I think it'll get a lot easier. I mean, it used to be, I've been using the internet and email for too long. 25 or 30 years. And some of the things you look back that you did, now you would never do that. But, I now have passwords, my security system, and, it's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but every time I want to log in on my desktop, I get an alert on my phone and I have to, approve it. So I think people are just going to have to become smarter. But I think the technology is going to become easier to use. I don't think you're going to have to be really smart to protect your privacy. The other side of that question, though, is when we talked about technology solving the pandemic crisis, people are going to have to get used to being tracked. And I think people are going to give up some of their privacy to say, hey, your choice is we won't track anybody on your cell phone, on your mobile devices, but the risk of you being infected and getting COVID or something else is going to be higher because we won't know where the hotspots are.
Well, it's interesting, can I add, because they've just rolled that out across Australia. The government saying, hey, look, this isn't mandatory software, but it'll help us get on top of this COVID-19. Would you please, at least 40% of the population in Australia, can you take this up? Is that what's happening where you are?
Yeah, it's interesting because you probably got the story of a couple weeks ago in Florida. There, around spring break, there was a bunch. Well, it's the opposite time of the year for you, but at spring when everybody gets out of the winter and goes down to the beach. So so they went down to the beach, and the beaches were packed, and kids were, and there were a lot of young people, and they were saying, I'm young, this doesn't affect us.
Yeah.
Well, after that, they were able to track. Now, it was all anonymous, apparently. All I can tell you is what I read.
Yeah.
They said they were able to track the movement of the students, of all these young kids at the beach, where they went and where the hotspots resulted. And so they were already doing it. Now, there wasn't, we didn't have to get permission, and that may become a point. So I I haven't been asked to give permission. Can we track your movement? But because I've got a GPS in my smartphone, and we do go to the grocery store and go out and we go for a walk, I'm sure I'm being tracked.
They know it
But
anyway, don't they?
yeah, but the choice is, would I do I fight that battle and risk a bigger problem, or do I say I'm going to have to give up some of my rights, some of my privacy for the good, for the general good, for the welfare
betterment
of the community? Yeah, and I, in speaking about some of this technology, people in the past would talk about it, and one of the things that one of the questions I always ask when I talked about like especially keeping the H in HR, keeping the human in HR, I said, how many people in the room have lost a loved one or have personally been affected by cancer or by Parkinson's or by a mental illness or something on that level, and or Alzheimer's, and almost everybody in the room would raise their hand, and I said, how much privacy would you be willing to give up? And this was maybe related more to DNA and everything. How much privacy would you be willing to give up if it could either save your life or save a loved one?
Yes.
And like half the hands went up. A couple people halfway they thought about it.
Yeah.
But it changes. So I don't want to give up my privacy. But then you're put into that situation that, hey, if I had to put my DNA out on the internet, and or use one of the genealogy sites, and it can be tracked, and it's like, well, I don't want anybody else to know what my DNA is. But if that collective DNA could help cure cancer, cure Alzheimer's, could prevent the next pandemic, the majority of people are going to do it. So I think that norm is going to change when people understand what it is. You're still going to have protesters. You're going to still have people that fight it. But I think the shift, as I say, my favorite word is shift. Yep. I think the shift, everybody's plan, and it's going to change.
Well, that shift is underway, and there's clearly some upsides, some downsides, some things to talk about, like we've done today, Ira. Now, everybody who's on the call today, Ira, I'm wondering where they are going to find you. Which websites will they visit?
Well, you can go to Google. I know that for sure, and you can type in IRA WOLFE or IRA WOLFE. There's only a few of us in the world.
Yes.
There are other ones, but there's only one of me. So when you do that, you'll probably come up with either Success Performance Solutions or Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. I've got the other terms that come up. I got a podcast like
Yep.
you do. It's called Geeks Geezers, Googlization.com. We're on all the podcast platforms, so that may come up. I do have an offer for everybody who's listening.
Fantastic.
My book, the second edition of Recruiting the Googlization, just came out. There may be a little bit of a challenge for people. I know you're global, so we'll have to work something out for people
Yep.
who are out in the U.S. and Canada. But if you go to join.googlizationnation.com, that's join.googlizationnation.com, you'll get a free book. Basically, we need your name and address, and the only thing you do is pay for shipping. As I said, I'm not sure how the publisher is working with that on an international basis.
At the moment, at least,
I can make sure you get a digital copy if you go up and let me know you signed up for that. Fantastic. And then I also have a global community, or a community. We got about 1,000 people in it. We added about 300 in the last week or so, which is called Googlization Nation. And it's just people that are talking about the future of work, mostly HR people, but it's the future of work, a lot of the things we just talked about today. So if that's of interest, I do a podcast, I do a live stream, I interview experts like you're doing me. I interview other experts so I can keep sharp and find out what's going on. And I do those on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So it's pretty easy to find me. So, but I appreciate the opportunity. You can also just go to irawolfe.com. I got a website up there too.
That's an easier one. Well, look, for everybody who's on the call today, I will most certainly be making the links available back to Ira. Ira, keep the conversation going. You're doing some wonderful work. Thank you so very much for spending some time with me on the My Future Business show today.
Thanks very much, Rick. I appreciate it. You got great people, and I love this format. So thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.